very expensive piece of clothing. I mean, clothing in general, up until the last couple hundred years, really last 150 years, very expensive. Why? Why is it so expensive?
Because they have the jewels and
Even simple clothing, really expensive.
color. I don't know.
Even if it's not colored. Linen, but fibers. How do you take cotton or wool and make it into fabric? You know the process?
It's really hard.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work if you're doing it by hand. Now we have machines do it, but so first, with wool, for example, then you have to take and you have to use a spinning wheel or another tool and spin it into thread. Then once you've done all that thread, you have this big frame called a loom, like Penelope, and one thread at a time you weave that fabric together to make fabric. It takes a lot of work to make fabric by hand. Now we have machines do it, which is why part of why clothing is so cheap now. But so this is a nicely made garment made by hand. It's also dyed fancy colors, parts of animals to dye it different colors. It's long. It's a long garment, so it's got more fabric in it. Okay. Anyway, what else is special about Joseph besides the fact that his father loves him extra? What else is special about him besides the fact that his father loves him extra? He's got these dreams that he has, and what does he dream about in the field in this dream? All right, so in the one, he's got sheaves of wheat that he and his brothers have made. The brothers' sheaves are bowing down to his. Another one, he sees stars bowing down to him. His dream mean that he'll rule over his brothers. His brothers don't like this, so what do they do to him?
They want big plot to kill him, but instead of killing him, they sell him.
Right, yeah, they're going to kill him, but then Reuben, the eldest, out of killing him, they sell him into slavery. And Joseph ends up getting brought by the people that he sold to. Where do they take him?
To Egypt.
To Egypt. Down into Egypt. Going back to Joseph chapter 39, we're in 38, brother Judah. But moving back to Joseph, who's going to be the main character of the rest of Genesis. Chapter 39, down there. The Lord was with Joseph, prospering his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in its charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge. And with him there he did not concern himself with anything, except the food which he ate. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" And she spoke to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside." So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "Beside me," and fled outside. Now, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. So what happens to Joseph while he's in Egypt?
He gets in prison.
Yes, how does he end up in prison?
He tries to rape his daughter.
I thought they all died because of that.
Potiphar.
Potiphar is what? Not his daughter.
His wife. No,
His wife. What happens between Joseph and Potiphar's wife? Yeah, she tricks him. What does she keep saying to him? Yeah, she says, lie with me. She keeps telling him day after day. And he tells her what?
No.
No. But then what happens?
Then she set him up.
She sets him up. How does she set him up?
Aren't they in a room and
Yeah, they're inside. Nobody else is there. And what does she do?
she screams or like yells?
And does what?
Um,
And she told people that he tried to rape her.
Yeah, how does she, what evidence does she give that Joseph tried to rape her?
his garments beside me. Because he literally
Yeah, how does she get his garment?
He left it in the wrong
Why did he leave it there?
Why did who leave it there?
Why did Joseph leave his clothes behind?
She was holding it.
Right. So, verse 11 here, it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. She grabs him by the clothes to seduce him, to assault her. So Joseph ends up in jail.
at the worst of luck.
Yeah. Chapter 40. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. Let's put the phone away. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad today? Then they said to him, we have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as it was budding, the blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, according to your former custom, when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket, all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. What happens in 40 here? While Joseph's in prison? Who else is with him in the prison? Yeah, Pharaoh's baker and his what? His butler, his cupbearer, the guy who brings his food to him. A trusted position because he could easily poison him. And what happens to these 2 guys while they're in prison?
Wait, you talking about what happens to Pharaoh's baker and butler?
Yeah, the baker and the butler, while they're in prison with Joseph, what happens to them?
The dream?
They have dreams also, yes. So we had Joseph having dreams before. Now these guys have dreams. What's the deal with their dreams? What about the cupbearer, the butler? What's his dream?
7 of those 7 years.
Nope. We're in chapter 40 here, so.
Oh,
Verse 9.
oh, the vine in front of them. And
There's a vine.
branches,
Mm-hmm.
blossom.
And what does Joseph say this dream means?
Intercourage. The big branch.
He's going to get his job back in 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. He says, please let him know. Do me a favor. Tell him about me. And then the baker, what does the baker's dream involve?
They had big food,
Yep.
and the birds were eating.
Yes, he's got these baskets of bread on his head, and the birds come and eat them. And what does Joseph say?
Hanging on a tree.
Yes.
Oh, the birds will eat his flesh.
Yes, he says in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. And what happens 3 days later? Yeah, what he said. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he has his party, and the cupbearer, in verse 21, goes back to his job, and the baker, verse 22, gets hanged. Does the cupbearer put in a word for Joseph? As Joseph has asked? No, he forgot. He forgets.
He did not like it.
He didn't like subscribe and save. Yeah. All right, chapter 41. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. It's the river runs through Egypt. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning, his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. And just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph. In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. And behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk. And lo, 7 ears withered, thin and scorched. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin years scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them, 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, "Bow the knee," and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from it. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." He named the second Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do." When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. All right, chapter 41, nice long chapter. What development happens here in Joseph's life? Joseph's in prison. How does he get out? Yeah, why does Pharaoh bring Joseph out of jail? The cupbearer says Pharaoh had this.
7 fat cows,
Mm-hmm.
that, are eaten by all the 7 cows.
Right. So he has 2 versions of the same dream. We find out the first one, there are these 7 cows. They're fat. And Joseph interprets it and says, "What's going to happen?" What is it? What's the meaning of the dream, according to Joseph?
You're gonna have 7 years.
The harvest will be bad. And so what does Pharaoh this situation?
They put Joseph in charge of it.
He puts Joseph in charge of things. And what does Joseph do?
Yeah, that's the food.
Right. During these years of plenty, they gather the grain from the land around it. and then they store up. So when the famine comes, what happens? A little grain that gets grown those 7 years, but they have plenty in storage, so they've got enough. Yes. And Joseph, notice he's made second to this Egyptian wife, has 2 sons. Yes, and not only, what else happens? Not only do they have lots of food, yes, they get money. Why? Come and they buy the extra food off of the Egyptians. All right, chapter 42. Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. And Jacob, notice going back to the land of Canaan, Jacob and his sons. And Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" He said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I am afraid that harm may befall him." Why is Jacob being careful with Benjamin?
Oh, okay.
He's also the baby. So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now, to the land, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." "Guys, you have come to look at the undefended parts of our land." Then they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man." They said, "Your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive, unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested whether there is truth in you." Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined in your prison. But as for the rest of you, go carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified and you will not die." And they did so. He would not listen. But, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and to restore every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there. As one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money, and behold, it was in the mouth of his sack. Then he turned to his brothers. "My money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack." And their hearts sank, and they "The man, the lord of the land, spoke harshly with us and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, 'We are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no longer alive, and the youngest is with our father today in the land of Canaan.' The man, the lord of the land, said to us, 'By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, that I may know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will give your brother to you, and you may trade in the land.' They were dismayed. Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me.' Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, 'You may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I will return him to you.' But Jacob said, 'My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm should befall him on the journey you are taking, then you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow.'" Sheol is the underworld. All right, what happens here in chapter 42? So there's this famine, and
The brothers back to Joseph.
yes, why did his brothers show up? Why did Joseph's brothers show up in Egypt? Right, and also, Joseph's brothers are starving. So their father sends them to Egypt to buy food. And what happens in this encounter between Joseph and his brothers? After however many years they've been apart. What happens here when they meet? They don't recognize him. But He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. I mean, he's dressed as an Egyptian. He's speaking Egyptian to them. We read that there's an interpreter translating between Egyptian and Hebrew for them. They don't recognize him. He's probably gone. So what does he do? Yeah, he says, you guys are spies, and he puts them in jail. Right. I'll keep one of you here as a hostage. If you bring back the other brother, the 11th brother, then I'll believe you. And when he sends the 9 of them away, leaving Simeon in jail, what does he give them when he sends them away? He doesn't give them money. He gives them food, and then what's the deal with the money? Where does this money come from? Back with them. And they tell their father, look, we need to bring Benjamin back with us because Simeon is locked up there. And how does Jacob respond? He says no. Joseph is dead. Simeon, I doubt he's ever going to get out of there. And now you want to bring Benjamin away? And he says about Benjamin, his brother is dead and he alone is left. Remember, still this tension because of if he doesn't come back. All right, let's see. Let's do one more chapter really quickly. 43. So it came about when they had finished eating the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. Judah spoke to him, however, saying, the man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you do not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you. Then Israel said, why did you treat me so badly by telling the man whether you still had another brother? But they said, the man questioned particularly about us and our relatives, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another? We will arise and go, that we may live and not die, we, as well as you and our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags, and that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also, and arise, return to the man. And may God Almighty grant you compassion. So the men took this present, and they took double the money in their hand, and Benjamin. Then they arose and went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. So the man did as Joseph said, and brought the men to Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid, because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we are being brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us, and take us for slaves with our donkeys. So they came near to Joseph's house steward, and spoke to him at the entrance of the house, and said, O my lord, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. And it came about, we have also brought down other money in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. He said, be at ease, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. Then the man brought the men in, for they had heard that they were to eat a meal there. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which was in their hand, and bowed to the ground before him. They bowed down in homage. As he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, he said, is this your youngest brother? He sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, serve the meal. So they served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is loathsome to the Egyptians. Now they were seated before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in astonishment. He took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5. We'll pick up again. Have a good afternoon. I'll get you 41 to 50 questions tomorrow.